Hey all, California Mick here. Poet, sculptor, musician, teacher, social justice activist, druid. So that's just some of my hats. Um, Welcome to the new Tribal Mind YouTube channel. In the first video that we did for the channel, we talked a little bit about kind of me, a little bit about my history and who I am and how I got the nickname California Mick that I want to use here on the videos and why I like it so much. I want to talk in this second video about why this channel is called The New Tribal Mind and what that actually means. There's a lot of misunderstanding in our culture about who the tribes were and what that means. So I want to kind of give my take on that. First of all, I said I was a druid. Like for some of you, it's like, what the heck is a druid? Some of you maybe have read about druids in a fantasy novel or seen characters in a video game. Basically, the druids were the educated class of the ancient Celtic people who were a tribal people in Europe. Druid translates from the Gaelic to mean wise one of the oak. And the reason that they use that as their title is because the culture was based on nature and the natural law. And so the kind of shorthand for the way nature works was the trees, and particularly the oak tree, the sacred oak. So anyway, the tribal mind, the phrase tribal mind, refers to the beliefs, philosophy, sociology, thinking of the world, the paradigm that the Celtic people lived according to. And again, like I said, it was based on nature and on the natural law. So it wasn't necessarily how the tribal Celts lived, which was from about 4000 BC to, well, never really went away completely. But dominated Europe until the advent of the Roman Empire taking over most of Europe. Anyway, so the tribal mind is how they thought, not how they lived. I call it the new tribal mind because what we're attempting to do and what I'm attempting to do in a lot of my research and writing lately is look back at the wisdom of our ancestors, our tribal ancestors. And I've learned that it relates to other tribal peoples around the world as well, but my specialty is in the Celts. But looking at that paradigm that they lived under, which is very, very different from the paradigm we live under, and trying to find ways to take that paradigm and apply it to contemporary culture. And the reason is, a lot of the stuff that we're struggling for in social justice, equality of women, acceptance of diversity, healthcare, universal education, all of that stuff was actually written into the law that the Celts lived under. We kind of think of, because we've been taught that tribal people were very primitive, but actually the Celtic people of Europe, who, by the way, didn't just live in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Cornwall, the Isle of Man. At their height, before Julius Caesar made war against them, the Celts stretched from Portugal to Turkey, from the Mediterranean to northern Scotland. It was a vast area. Most of Europe was Celtic at one time. Most of the major cities in Europe are named after Celtic subtribes. The Danube River that runs through Eastern Europe was named after the Celtic mother goddess Danu. London was named after Lu, the Celtic sun god. The Celts were everywhere, but if you look at our history books, you won't find them mentioned except when Julius Caesar makes war against them. And there's a reason for that, and it relates to this paradigm that we're going to be talking about. I hope I'm not getting too confusing. There's a lot of information here, and I'm trying to pare it down to just for our introductory purposes. But anyway, so in ancient Europe, you had two major cultural paradigms. There was a Celtic tribal one, and there was the paradigm of Greece and Rome, which were empires. And they were very, very different. They clashed in many ways, and that is the reason why we don't know very much about the Celtic tribal paradigm, because basically, eventually Rome won the war, wrote the history. And if you look at some of the aspects of the Celtic worldview, Women were equal under the law. We still have it's called the Brehon Law that the Celts lived under. Women were absolutely equal under the law. You didn't tell a Celtic woman what she couldn't do. One of the generals who defeated the Roman armies was a Celtic female. Women did everything that men did. Diversity was valued because, again, they took their wisdom from nature. So if you have a forest with one kind of tree, it's going to die. So they understood that our differences were part of our strength. The culture was very collective, egalitarian, individual rights balanced with the harmony of the tribe. But there wasn't the hierarchy that we have in our system. They believed in universal education. In fact, the Druids were the first people of Europe to practice universal education because as the intellectuals of the tribe, they thought that the product or the fruits of their intellectual labor, they were basically all the white collar jobs, teachers, doctors, healers, scientists. They believed that the fruits of their intellectual labor belonged to everybody, just like they shared the fruits of the farmer's labor and the catch that the miners had and the minerals and salts that were dug up by the miners. It was a shared wealth system. So they believed that their intellectual stuff belonged to the people. So hence the universal education, teaching people, sharing the fruits of their intellectual labor. It was gender inclusive. They didn't just think in this binary way about gender. LGBTQ people were actually honored in the Celtic culture, similar to the way they were in Native American tribal culture. They were the two spirits. In the Celtic world, they were called the walkers between the worlds, which was also a nickname for the Druids. There was shared wealth. There was a social justice system that wasn't about punishment and imprisonment. It was about restitution and rehabilitation and bringing people back into the tribe. There was no homelessness. There was nobody that was denied education. There was nobody that was denied health care. And this is all like 4,000 years ago. It was a pretty civilized culture. Plus, it was technologically advanced. The Celts invented the smelting of iron that changed the name of the age. They invented the safety pin. They invented the bit for the horse. They invented the iron-covered wheels that were used on the Conestoga wagons. The Roman roads that they were so proud of were built over old Celtic trading routes. And yet, if you look at our history books, they're not even left out because the Roman cultural paradigm was very different. Whereas women were equal among the Celts, they were property in the Roman world. The women were property of their fathers, and then through the marriage ceremony, they were transferred as property to their husbands. The Celtic world was very egalitarian. The Roman world was very hierarchical. The Celtic world believed in a cyclical way of looking at the world because that's how nature works in cycles. The Greco-Roman world was very linear. The Celtic world believed in when you saw duality, things that seemed to be in opposition, they assumed that they were two halves of the whole and you put them together. Our world believes in what I call dueling dualities. You see a duality and you choose the right side and fight the wrong side. So, typical of a warrior culture, we're always set against each other. There's the good guys, the bad guys, heaven versus hell, men versus women, us versus them, foreign versus... It's all about two opposing sides. In the Celtic world, there was multi-gender inclusiveness. Our system that we got from Greece and Rome is patriarchal. The thing that held the Celtic world together was pedagogy, education that was universal and that created the one tribe. The Roman and Greek culture were held together by military, by police, by fear, and by control. The Celtic world was animist. They believed that everything had spirit, the animals, the plants, the landscape. So they were very ecologically minded. They didn't waste anything in the natural world because they believed that the rest of the natural world was not very different from us, that they had spirit just like we do. Whereas in Greek and Rome, people, it's called anthropocentric. It was all about people. People were important. Nature was just stuff, raw material, didn't have spirit, just stuff that we could use any way that we want. Diversity was celebrated in the Celtic world. Homogeny was, you could even see it in the warriors. In the Celtic world, the warriors dressed to express their individuality. The Roman warriors dressed in uniform, so they all looked alike. So if you think about it, this Greco-Roman paradigm should sound really familiar. It was hierarchical, linear, binary, patriarchal, militaristic, anthropocentric, homogenous, and there's lots of other aspects. It's basically the same paradigm that we're living under now, because Rome attacked the Celts, defeated them, imposed their cultural paradigm. They eventually got into England, although that female general, the first time that Rome tried to get to England, kicked them out. But eventually they took over England, and all the Celts that didn't want to be Romanized fled to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, Isle of Man, and basically left kind of all the kiss butts in England. So England became the most Romanized of the former Celtic countries. So it adopted this hierarchical, patriarchal, linear, binary, military, anthropocentric, homogenous way of looking at the world. And we got our system from England. So we're basically the grandchild of the Roman Empire. Even most of the religions that we have here, because Rome couldn't defeat Christianity by killing them, so they sucked it into the Roman system. So Christianity, as it's come down to us, is also patriarchal, hierarchical, linear, binary, and oppositional, heaven versus hell, anthropocentric, and homogenous. So this system that we're living under is identical to the system that Rome lived under. When Julius Caesar defeated the Celts, he burned their libraries everywhere he went, because he didn't even want people to know that this culture existed, because it made him look bad. I have this fantasy of some Roman wife going to her husband and saying, okay, I'm your property, and she's a judge. Would you explain this to me, please? Or the other fantasy I have in my head is some Roman guy going to a Celtic guy and saying, tell your woman to get in line. And the Celtic guy looking at him going, you tell her, I'll watch. Because you didn't mess with Celtic women. So you had these two major cultural paradigms that were kind of in opposition to each other. They weren't particularly compatible. But Rome hated the Celtic world, so they tried to wipe it out. Fortunately, the Druids in Ireland, Rome never got over Ireland. When they saw all the libraries burning in mainland Europe, and whatever secular Rome didn't burn, the Roman Church ended up burning. But the Druids in Ireland just started stashing everything they could find in the Irish libraries, and that's how we know about the Brehon Law and some of this stuff. And they put it in Gaelic because they were the only scholars in Europe that knew Gaelic, although they also knew Greek and Latin. So they knew that if anybody else found it, they wouldn't know what it was. So you've got this clash of these two cultural titans, and it's still happening today. The struggle that we have against patriarchal and inclusiveness of women, the struggle for inclusiveness for racial minorities and sexual minorities, the struggle for universal health care, the struggle for universal education, the struggle for acceptance of gender identities, the struggle between trying to make it more just as far as shared wealth. All of those same struggles were happening back then. The problem is we've been so propagandized, we don't even know, most of us don't even know there is another way of looking at the world. We've been told that this Greco-Roman system that we're living under, this patriarchal, hierarchical thing, is the way it's always been, and it hasn't been. It's only been the dominant system among humans for maybe 1,500 years, 2,000 years at the most. And humans first appeared on the planet like 2.5 million years ago. So this system that we're living under is just kind of a blip. And it's not a particularly sustainable system. I mean, what the United States has been here for 242 years or so, and we've almost completely ruined our environment. We're really struggling just to survive as a species. The Greco-Roman system has only ever lasted maybe 500 years. It's the foundation of all the monarchies and all the dictatorships in Europe that have existed, and all of the wars that have existed. So one of the things that I hope to accomplish in these videos is to talk about that heritage that we've been robbed of, that heritage we haven't been taught, that way of looking at the world that for most of us answers the longings of our hearts, because we are tied to nature. Nature is our ecosystem. It's where we come from. And it's just scientific reality that if you look at nature to see how things work in nature, you can assume that since it's our ecosystem, we're a part of nature, that if it works that way in nature, it's going to work that way for us. So our best way of living on the planet is to find our harmony with the natural world. We've been lied to that we're separate from the natural world. We're not. But that's built in our hearts. It's built in our DNA. So those longings for more equality, more shared wealth, inclusion of people who are different, all of that stuff comes from our hearts. And this system that we're living under has to keep pounding into us what it believes, and making us live in fear, and putting people in prison, and allowing for failing schools, to keep us in control and keep us from really questioning some of this stuff. So, but we're going to do that on this this station. We're going to be questioning some of that stuff that we've been told all our lives is the way things have always been. And we're going to start looking to our ancestors and some of the ways that they live, to talk about how we can apply it. And it's not a matter of completely throwing out the system we have. It's just finding a way of examining it from an outside perspective, so that we can see what's good about the system and what sucks about the system, and how we can change it for the betterment of all of us, for some of these dreams that we have. And because it's based in nature, I've been told all my life, when I think about social justice and peace and ridding ourselves of war, that I'm a dreamer, head in the clouds, that's not realistic. But actually, this stuff is based on the natural world, which means it's based in scientific reality. And that's going to be what we're looking for. Just a little thing about the war. We think, well, war has always been here. Do you know, a lot of the tribes in California who have the similar, because they take their wisdom from nature as well, have a very similar cultural paradigm to the Celts, the tribal Celts, did not even have a word in their language for war. War was not a part of their experience. So this idea that the tribal people were very warlike and very primitive and always beating each other over the head with clubs is just simply not true. And we're going to be talking more about that. So our purpose here, look to our ancestors, look to some of the really cool ways that they saw the world that answer the longings of our hearts, and then start talking about ways that we can apply it to contemporary culture, and the ways some pretty amazing people in the world are already doing that at the grassroots level, so we can get away from some of the worst parts of our culture that keep us oppressed and frustrated and poor and struggling. It is possible, and it's not a pipe dream. We have thousands of years of tribal history to show us the way as examples of people living a different way on the land, and we can do that too. So that's our hope. That's our goal here at the New Tribal Mind YouTube channel. And I just want to invite you to join the journey with us. Good talking to you, and we'll be back again with another video to explore some of these ideas. And I'm really excited about it, and I think you will be once we start getting into kind of the meat of this. It's a whole different way of looking at the world, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Thank you, and may the spirits of nature bless you.